The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty platform of Redemption Creek's railway station. Margaret Hayes stood with her leather trunk at her feet, her pressed traveling dress already gathering a fine layer of prairie dust. She clutched her ticket to Boston with trembling fingers, watching the black locomotive hiss and groan as it prepared for departure. 3 months. That's how long she'd lasted as a schoolteacher in this godforsaken frontier town. Back east, her mother had warned her about the Wild West, but Margaret had been full of romantic notions about bringing education and civilization to the frontier. Reality had been far harsher: the crude one-room schoolhouse, the rough children who'd never held a book, the endless wind that crept through every crack, and the loneliness that settled in her bones like the cold. "Miss Hayes." A deep voice called out behind her. She turned to see Cole Brennan striding across the platform, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each determined step. The local rancher had been nothing but trouble since she'd arrived, always watching her with those intense gray eyes, tipping his hat whenever she passed, leaving wildflowers on her schoolhouse desk. She'd rebuffed every advance, every invitation to dinner, every offer of escort through town. "Mr. Brennan, I'm about to board," she said curtly, turning back toward the train. "I know," he said, stopping just a few feet away. "That's why I'm here." Margaret's heart hammered in her chest. She'd specifically chosen an early morning train to avoid any dramatic farewells. "I don't recall inviting you to see me off." "You didn't. But I couldn't let you leave without speaking my piece." His voice was steady, but there was an urgency beneath it that made her pause. The conductor called out, "All aboard for Cheyenne, Denver, and points east." Margaret picked up her trunk handle, but Cole's hand gently covered hers. His touch was warm, calloused from years of ranch work, and it sent an unexpected jolt through her. "Please, Miss Hayes." "Margaret. Just 5 minutes. That's all I ask." "I'll miss my train," she protested, though something in his voice made her hesitate. "There's another train Thursday," he said quietly. "But there won't be another chance for me to tell you what's in my heart." Against her better judgment, Margaret set down her trunk. The other passengers were boarding, and the conductor was making his final calls, but something in Cole Brennan's expression held her rooted to the spot. "You think you've seen all that Redemption Creek has to offer," Cole began, his gray eyes never leaving hers. "But you've only seen it through the lens of struggle and hardship. You haven't seen what this place could become, what it already is for those of us who love it." Margaret crossed her arms defensively. "Mr. Brennan, I've spent 3 months here. I've seen the dirt, the rough manners, the absence of any culture or refinement." "You've seen the surface," he interrupted gently. "But you haven't seen the sunset from Eagle Ridge, where the whole valley turns gold and purple. You haven't been to the spring meadows when they're covered with lupins, stretching as far as the eye can see. You haven't sat on my porch during a summer storm and watched lightning dance across the mountains. Poetry about landscapes won't change the reality of frontier life," she said, but her voice had softened slightly. Cole took a deep breath. "You're right. Let me speak plainly then. I'm in love with you, Margaret Hayes. I have been since the day you stepped off that train 3 months ago, looking terrified and determined in equal measure. I've watched you teach children who'd never been shown kindness by a teacher. I've seen you stay late every night, preparing lessons by lamplight. I've witnessed your courage, your dedication, and your fierce intelligence." Margaret's cheeks flushed. "You presume too much, Mr. Brennan." "Maybe I do. But I'm a rancher, ma'am. I know when to take a risk on something valuable." He took a step closer. "You think you're running back to civilization, back to where you belong. But what if you belong here? What if you're running away from the very place where you could build something extraordinary?" The train whistle blew, a long, mournful sound that seemed to echo her own conflicted heart. "I have a life waiting for me in Boston," Margaret said, but even to her own ears, the words sounded hollow. "I have family, friends, propriety." "You have expectations," Cole corrected gently. "But do you have happiness? Do you have purpose? Because I've seen your face when you're teaching, Margaret. I've seen you light up when little Tommy finally reads his first full sentence, or when Sarah Jane solves an arithmetic problem. You're not happy when you think about Boston. You're resigned to it. Margaret felt tears prickling at her eyes. How dare this rough cowboy see so clearly into her heart? What exactly are you asking of me, Mr. Brennan? I'm asking you to give us, a chance. 1 month. Stay 1 more month. Let me show you the real Redemption Creek. Let me court you properly. And at the end of that month, if you still want to leave, I'll buy your ticket myself and carry your trunk to the train with my blessing. The conductor was climbing aboard now, giving Margaret a pointed look. It was now or never. You're asking me to upend my entire life based on wildflowers and sunset views? Margaret said, but there was less bite in her tone now. No, Cole said seriously. I'm asking you to give yourself a chance at a different kind of life. One you choose, not one chosen for you by circumstance and expectation. Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Everything sensible told her to board that train. She was a proper Boston lady, educated at a fine seminary, raised in a 3-story brownstone with servants and culture. What was she doing even considering staying in this rough frontier town with a cowboy she barely knew? But then she thought about the past 3 months. Yes, there had been hardship. Yes, she'd been lonely and uncomfortable. But there had also been moments of surprising joy. The way the children had gradually warmed to her. The satisfaction of seeing progress in their learning. The strange sense of possibility that seemed to hang in the wide-open air of the frontier. And if she was honest with herself, Cole Brennan had been part of those moments of joy. His quiet presence at community gatherings. His respectful but persistent attention. The way he'd fixed the schoolhouse roof without being asked, and left without waiting for thanks. 1 month, she asked, opening her eyes. 1 month, he confirmed. And I promise you'll get to make your own decision at the end, free and clear. No pressure, no obligations. The train began to move, slowly pulling away from the platform with a great hiss of steam. Margaret watched it go, her ticket still clutched in her hand. Her trunk remained on the platform. She was staying. God help her, she was actually staying. I must be out of my mind, she whispered. Cole's face broke into a smile so bright it rivaled the morning sun. Or maybe you're finally coming to your senses. Don't make me regret this, Mr. Brennan. Cole, he said. If we're courting, you should call me Cole. We're not courting yet, Margaret said primly, trying to maintain some dignity despite the fact that she'd just abandoned her train for a cowboy she'd spent 3 months trying to ignore. We're exploring possibilities. Fair enough, ma'am. Fair enough. He picked up her trunk with ease. Let me get this back to the boarding house for you. Then, if you're amenable, I'd like to take you to breakfast at Mrs. Chen's restaurant. She makes the best biscuits west of the Mississippi. As they walked back through town, Margaret couldn't help but notice things she'd been too miserable to see before. The way the morning light made the wooden buildings glow. The friendly waves from early rising shopkeepers. The distant mountains, purple and majestic against the bright blue sky. Cole, she said as they reached the boarding house. Yes, Margaret. What made you so certain that I might stay? I've been nothing but cold to you for 3 months. He set down her trunk and turned to face her with surprising gentleness in his expression. Because beneath that cold exterior, I saw someone fighting with herself. You weren't cold, Margaret. You were scared. Scared of wanting something different from what you'd always been told you should want. His words struck so close to the truth that Margaret had to look away. 1 month, she repeated, as much to convince herself as to confirm with him. 1 month, he agreed. Starting now. The following weeks passed in a blur of new experiences that slowly reshaped Margaret's understanding of frontier life. Cole kept his word, courting her with a patience and creativity that surprised her. He took her riding into the hills, where she discovered that the landscape she'd dismissed as barren was actually teeming with life and beauty. He introduced her to the families on surrounding ranches, and she found a community of people who were rough around the edges but generous and welcoming in ways Boston society never had been. Most surprisingly, he listened to her. Really listened. When she talked about her dreams for the school, he didn't dismiss them as impractical. Instead, he organized a community meeting where ranchers pledged funds and materials to expand the schoolhouse. When she mentioned missing theater, he arranged for a traveling acting troupe to stop in Redemption Creek on their circuit. Margaret found herself laughing more than she had in years. She discovered that Cole had a dry wit and could debate literature and philosophy with surprising depth. His ranch library, she learned during her first visit, was extensive and well-used. "You're not what I expected," she admitted one evening as they sat on his porch, watching the sunset he'd promised her. It was every bit as spectacular as he'd claimed, the valley ablaze with gold and crimson light. "What did you expect?" Cole asked, handing her a cup of coffee. "Someone rough and uneducated. Someone who'd want to tame me or change me." "I don't want to tame you, Margaret. I fell in love with your fire, your intelligence, your fierce independence. Why would I want to change that?" He paused, then added quietly, "I just want to be the person standing beside you while you burn bright." Margaret felt her heart skip. Over the past weeks, she'd been fighting a losing battle against her own growing feelings. Cole Brennan had somehow become essential to her happiness, and the thought of leaving terrified her almost as much as the thought of staying once had. "The month is almost up," she said softly. "I know. I'm supposed to make a decision." "You are." "Cole, I." She struggled to find words for the confusion of feelings inside her. "I'm afraid. What if I stay and I fail? What if I'm not strong enough for this life? What if?" He took her hand gently. "What if you succeed? What if you build a school that educates generations? What if you find happiness in a place you never expected? Fear is just another frontier, Margaret. And I've seen you cross frontiers before." That night, as Cole drove her back to the boarding house in his wagon, Margaret realized that the question wasn't whether she wanted to stay. The question was whether she was brave enough to choose her own happiness over others' expectations. The next morning, she went to the telegraph office and sent a message to her mother in Boston, "Have found my purpose. Will not be returning. Will write with details. Your loving daughter, Margaret." Then she went to find Cole at his ranch. He was working with a horse in the corral, but he stopped when he saw her approaching. "I'm staying," she said without preamble. "Not for a month, not for a trial period. I'm staying because this is where I belong. This is where I want to build my life." Cole's face transformed with joy, but he didn't move toward her. "You're sure?" "I'm terrified," Margaret admitted. "But I'm sure." "You were right, Cole. I was running away from the very thing I needed most, the freedom to choose my own path." He climbed over the corral fence and crossed to her, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Margaret Hayes, would you do me the honor of letting me court you properly, with a view toward marriage when you're ready?" "Yes," she said, and then, throwing propriety to the wind, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was clumsy and awkward and perfect, her first kiss with the cowboy who'd stopped her from boarding that train. The cowboy who'd seen not what she was supposed to be, but who she could become. When they finally broke apart, Cole was grinning. "So, does this mean you'll come to the barn dance with me on Saturday?" "I suppose it does," Margaret said, unable to stop her own smile. "Though I should warn you, I'm a terrible dancer." "Good thing this is the frontier, then. Out here, we make up our own steps." As they stood together in the morning sunshine, Margaret realized that Redemption Creek had lived up to its name. She'd found redemption here, not from sin, but from a life that was never truly hers. She'd been saved not by boarding that train back east, but by having the courage to stay when a cowboy asked her to give him a chance. And what a chance it was turning out to be.